7 months pregnant, I carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs while my husband, glued to his video game, barely acknowledged me. When he finally spoke, it was to call me disgusting and demand I lose weight after the baby. His friends even laughed. That was the moment I realized I couldn't stay. I packed my bags, left in the dead of night, and started over. But leaving him wasn't easy, and the battle for my freedom had only just begun. It started with an innocuous moment, one of those little things I should have brushed off. But the more I think about it, the more it feels like the beginning of something I should have seen coming a long time ago. It was a typical Saturday morning. I had spent all week running around, making sure everything was in order, getting ready for our baby's arrival, working my full-time job, and making dinner every night. I just hit my 3rd trimester, and I could feel the exhaustion setting in. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When I met Liam, everything seemed perfect. We met through a mutual friend at a party. He was charming, charismatic, the life of the room. I was immediately drawn to him. He had that quiet confidence, the one that made you feel like he could take on the world and win. He made me laugh, and soon enough, we were inseparable. We had dreams of starting a family together, of building a life we were both proud of. We were both working professionals, young but stable, and everything felt like it was on the up and up. But somewhere between my morning sickness and his late nights with his friends, things started to shift. At first, I told myself it was just the pressure of the pregnancy. Maybe he was nervous about becoming a father. But as the months wore on, the signs of his indifference grew. It was subtle at first. He'd promised to help out around the house, but then his nights would be spent playing video games or binge watching his favorite shows while I struggled to get through my day. His calls to me were mostly for the mundane. Can you grab the laundry? Where's my favorite shirt? And when I asked for help, the responses ranged from condescending to outright dismissive. At 7 months pregnant, I thought things would get better. But instead, they got worse. I had just finished work that Friday evening, and I stopped by the grocery store on the way home. Liam had promised to help with the bags, but of course, when I walked in, he was sprawled on the couch, headphones on, eyes glued to the screen of his game console. I let out a deep sigh as I dragged in the heavy bags of groceries, knowing full well that he wouldn't even offer to help. It wasn't the first time. He'd been getting more distant, more irritated with every little thing I asked of him. But this time, as I stumbled up the stairs to our 2nd-floor apartment, sweat dripping down my back and the weight of the bags pulling at my arms, something inside of me snapped. I finally set the last of the bags down on the kitchen counter and looked at him, expecting, at the very least, an apology or maybe an offer to help. Instead, I got something I wasn't prepared for. "Jesus, you're getting huge," he said, not even looking away from his screen. "You better lose that weight after the baby. I can't keep up with this. It's disgusting." The words hit me like a slap to the face. I didn't know what to say. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. I looked at him, and for the first time in 5 years, I didn't recognize the man I had fallen in love with. This wasn't the person I thought I'd be starting a family with. This wasn't the man I had been so proud to marry. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked over to him, leaned down, and kissed his forehead, like I always did when I was trying to calm myself. But this time, I pulled back and looked him in the eyes. "I need to shower," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded absently, not even realizing that I was walking away, not realizing that he had just crossed a line he'd never be able to come back from. I stood under the hot water, letting it pour over me, my mind spinning, my heart racing. I couldn't process what had just happened. I kept replaying his words in my head. "It's disgusting. You better lose that weight." His friends had laughed too. It wasn't just the words, it was the complete lack of empathy, the lack of basic human decency. How had I ended up here? The tears that followed weren't just tears of hurt. They were tears of realization. I'd been ignoring the signs, making excuses for him. He wasn't just stressed. He wasn't nervous about the baby. This was who he was. This was how he truly saw me, how he truly saw us. I'd always known that relationships took work, that marriage wasn't easy, but I never imagined it would feel like this. All of the times I'd swallowed my frustrations, all of the times I'd ignored the little comments he'd made about my body, about my worth, those weren't just bad days. This was a pattern I had been too afraid to acknowledge. When I finished showering, I changed into my comfiest maternity dress, the one that used to make me feel good about myself. But now, standing in front of the mirror, it felt suffocating. I didn't recognize the person in front of me. She wasn't just tired or pregnant. She was beaten down, emotionally drained, and trying to make herself invisible. The reflection staring back at me was not the person I used to be. I had become a shell. I thought about everything I had done for him, the sacrifices, the patience, the way I had stood by him through every financial failure, every late night spent on video games, every promise he broke. He said I was moody, but no one ever asked if I was okay. No one ever cared how I was doing. Not until I was on the verge of breaking. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through messages, trying to calm myself, but the feeling of his words kept ringing in my ears. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let him keep treating me this way, and I couldn't bring a child into this mess. I walked out of the bathroom, my heart still pounding in my chest. Liam was still sitting on the couch, headphones on, oblivious to everything. I grabbed my hospital bag, the one I'd packed just in case the baby decided to come early, and threw in a few other essentials. I couldn't stay here anymore. I told him I needed to clear my head and get some air. He didn't even look up, didn't even ask where I was going. I was just another inconvenience to him. As I walked out the door, I felt my phone buzz in my hand. It was a text from Liam. "Where are the leftovers?" I had just packed a bag and walked out of our apartment. and all he could ask about was food. I typed back quickly, "I'm not coming back tonight." I blocked his number and left. It felt surreal. I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew that staying would only make things worse. I drove to the hotel, my mind racing, my heart in my throat. I couldn't believe what I had just done. Was I overreacting? Was I being dramatic? My whole body felt like it was on fire, but I knew there was no turning back now. The moment I walked out that door, I had made a decision that would change everything. The first few hours in the hotel were filled with disbelief. I couldn't stop shaking, but I also felt a strange sense of relief. There was a part of me that felt lighter, like I had taken the first step toward freedom. And then there was the overwhelming fear. What had I just done? How was I going to move forward? I called my sister, Emily, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "You've done the right thing," she said. "You and the baby deserve better. I'm coming over tomorrow. We'll figure this out." I hung up and sat on the bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. I thought about the future. What would it be like to raise a child on my own? Would I be able to support her? What would Liam do? I had no idea what kind of man he would become now that he knew I was leaving him. But what I did know was that I was not going back to that apartment. I wasn't going back to the man who had reduced me to tears, to the man who had treated me like I was invisible. I spent the rest of the night scrolling through our old pictures, looking at all the memories we had shared. It was painful, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The man I had once loved had disappeared, and in his place was someone who didn't care about me, didn't care about our child. And that was something I couldn't ignore. The next few days were a whirlwind. Emily arrived at the hotel with a bag of clothes and a fresh perspective. She was a rock, a calm in the storm of my emotions. She listened to me vent, offered advice, and made sure I took care of myself. She even helped me find a lawyer. That was when everything started to click. The lawyer explained my rights, advised me to keep records of everything, and helped me set up a plan to move forward with the divorce. As much as it hurt to think about it, I had to accept that I was no longer married to the person I'd fallen in love with. He was gone, and in his place was someone I didn't recognize. We made a plan for me to move out of the apartment. I wasn't ready to face Liam just yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment with him. He had no idea that I was consulting with a lawyer, no idea that I had already made the decision to leave for good. It was time to take back control of my life. The next few days were filled with quiet planning and inevitable moments of hesitation. The guilt gnawed at me in waves, especially at night when the house felt too still, too quiet, and my heart ached for the life I had imagined with Liam, the one where we raised our child together, laughing over dinners and late-night chats about our hopes for the future. But that wasn't the reality anymore. I wasn't living in a dream. I was living in a nightmare, pretending to be happy while my dignity and self-worth were being chipped away bit by bit. And each day I waited, the more my spirit withered. I had to do this. For me, for my baby, and for the woman I used to be before Liam turned me into someone I didn't recognize. The day I moved out was a blur of emotions. I couldn't even remember how many times I had checked the clock, wondering if Liam would be home yet, wondering if he would catch me packing up the last of my things. I had been preparing for weeks, sifting through my belongings, making sure I took only what was mine. Emily helped me, as always, her presence a steadying force in the chaos of moving. She had arranged for a small moving van to arrive in the late afternoon. We had it all planned out, quick, discreet, and as painless as possible. I had to be out before Liam returned from his parents' house. He'd been gone all weekend for a guy's trip, and I knew it would be my best chance to slip away. The moments before I left were surreal. I stood in the middle of our living room, staring at the place I had once called home. The couch where Liam had told me I was disgusting. The kitchen where we had shared so many meals together, most of them filled with laughter and hope for the future. I could hardly recognize any of it now. It felt like a trap. I walked out of the apartment for the last time, my heart beating in my chest. Emily was already downstairs with the moving van. I could barely focus as I made the final sweep of the apartment. I took my purse and my bag with the essentials. That was it. I wasn't leaving anything behind except the memories, and that was more than enough. We moved everything out in under 2 hours. Emily and I had been in and out of the apartment so quickly that I felt like I was moving in a dream. We didn't talk much as we packed, but the silence between us felt comfortable, like the calm before a storm. I knew what I was doing, but part of me felt like I was betraying the person I used to be. The one who believed in love, who thought relationships were built on trust and mutual respect. But that person was gone now, and in her place was someone stronger, someone who had fought for her right to be happy, to feel valued. I had done my best, but this was where it ended. We loaded the last of my things into Emily's car, and she looked at me, her eyes filled with both sadness and pride. "You're doing the right thing," she said, squeezing my hand. I nodded, but there was still a pit in my stomach, a fear of the unknown that I couldn't shake. What if I failed? What if I wasn't enough? But the answers didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was getting away, starting fresh, and giving my baby the life she deserved. I closed the door behind me, and I left. The first night in my new apartment was one of the hardest I've ever experienced. I sat on the floor of my tiny living room, surrounded by boxes with a deep ache in my chest. I felt like a failure, like I had failed my marriage, failed Liam, and even failed myself. I had spent so many years trying to make things work, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. And now, everything was different. But the difference was necessary. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the walls were closing in on me. I could breathe. I could think. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I started unpacking my things, setting up the baby's nursery with care. Every item I placed in her room felt like a promise that I would do everything I could to raise her in a home filled with love, respect, and security. I'd already made up my mind that I wasn't going to let my daughter grow up in a toxic environment. I wasn't going to repeat the cycle of pain and manipulation that I had been caught in. I started a new routine, one that was mine and mine alone. I took long walks to clear my head, spent time at the local coffee shop, and began to rebuild my life piece by piece. The baby was due in a few weeks, and I wanted to be as ready as possible. But more than anything, I needed to get to a place where I wasn't just surviving. I wanted to thrive. Of course, Liam didn't take my departure well. It didn't take long for him to realize I had left. When I checked my phone, there were several missed calls and messages from him, most of them frantic and angry. Where are you? Why did you leave? What about the baby? You can't do this. I'm sorry, okay? Let's fix this. It was a pattern I had seen before. He wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was sorry because he had lost control. He was sorry because he was no longer the center of my world. But I didn't answer any of his messages. I didn't owe him anything anymore. The man who had made me feel worthless was no longer my concern. A few days later, I received a text from his sister, asking how I was doing and if I was okay. She seemed genuinely concerned. I told her I was fine, that I was starting over, and that I was doing what was best for me and the baby. But that wasn't the end. Liam tried to manipulate his way back into my life, sending gifts, letters, even trying to show up at my new apartment uninvited. It was as if he thought I would just let him back in, but I wouldn't. The final decision was made when I met with my lawyer to finalize the divorce. Liam's response was to contest everything, custody, finances, everything. But as soon as my lawyer presented the evidence of his emotional abuse and financial fraud, his tune changed. He suddenly wanted to negotiate. But I wasn't negotiating anymore. I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to let him silence me again. The days following the initial meeting with the lawyer felt like a blur. Liam was relentless in his pursuit to regain control, texting, emailing, and even contacting my friends to try to get to me. His behavior was erratic. At first, he was calm and apologetic, begging for another chance, but when I didn't respond, he turned hostile. I knew it wasn't genuine. His apologies were empty, meant to manipulate me back into his life. I wasn't fooled anymore. This was about his pride, not about making amends. The first time I saw him after I moved out was at a court hearing. He walked in, looking disheveled and tired, his eyes avoiding mine. He didn't look like the man I had married. He looked like a stranger, someone I barely recognized. And as we sat in that cold, sterile courtroom, I realized how far I had come. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't afraid of losing him, because I had already lost him the moment he showed me who he really was. The lawyer went over the financials, the fraudulent credit card, the emotional abuse. It was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment I would finally get my chance to be heard, to tell the world that what he did to me was wrong. The judge ruled in my favor that day. I was granted primary physical custody of the baby. The financial settlement went mostly in my favor, and Liam was ordered to pay child support based on his actual income, which was higher than he had claimed. His demands for full custody were laughed out of the room. He had no case. It was over. But even then, I knew the hardest part wasn't over. The divorce would still take time, and the emotional scars would take much longer to heal. But I had taken back my life, and I was ready to build a future with my daughter. One where love wasn't about control, where I didn't have to tiptoe around someone's feelings just to survive. The months following the court hearing were filled with adjustment. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with a nursery that I decorated myself, filled with soft colors and little touches that made it feel like a home. It was my space, my sanctuary, and the space where I could raise my daughter in peace. I threw myself into motherhood with all the love and dedication I had. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of Lily cooing in her crib, her little face lighting up when she saw me. She was the reason I kept going, the reason I had left everything behind. And every day, I thanked the universe for her, for giving me a reason to wake up and fight for a better life. But the emotional toll of everything that had happened wasn't gone. I still had moments when I doubted myself, when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. I'd watch other moms, see their partners supporting them, and I'd feel that pang of sadness, the loss of what could have been. But then I'd look at Lily and everything clicked. I was doing the right thing. She deserved better. And so did I. I kept my boundaries firm with Liam. He made a few attempts to reach out, sending a few more texts, asking to see Lily, trying to convince me to fix things. But I ignored him. I couldn't let him back in, not after everything he had put me through. His first visitation came soon after the court ruling. He showed up just as he had promised. But he was late as usual, and when he did arrive, he seemed more interested in making his friends think he was a good father than actually spending time with his daughter. Lily was only a few weeks old, but I could tell something wasn't right. He looked uncomfortable, as if he didn't really know what to do with her. He kept asking me questions about feeding her, changing her, and when she got fussy, he handed her back to me with a sigh, saying, "This isn't how I pictured it." I couldn't help but feel sorry for him, but not in the way I used to. This wasn't the man I had loved. This was a man who was more concerned about his image than being there for his daughter. The second visitation was just as bad. He was 40 minutes late, and when he did show up, he barely interacted with Lily. He complained about the supervised nature of the visits, as if that was somehow my fault. He didn't ask about her milestones or anything that showed any real care. After an hour, he left, making some excuse about needing to meet with his bandmates. It hurt for a moment, but I didn't let myself dwell on it. The truth was clear. He was no longer a priority in my life. I was the only one Lily needed. I was the one who would raise her, love her, and teach her what a real relationship looked like. As the months went on, I began to rebuild my life. The financial strain that had weighed on me during my marriage started to ease. I had a steady income, child support, and I was getting better at budgeting. I started making plans for Lily's future, saving for her education, and even treating myself to little luxuries that I had never allowed myself before. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had been there for me from the beginning, the ones who never judged me when I stayed in a relationship that wasn't healthy. They cheered me on as I regained my confidence, as I found a new sense of purpose. I joined a support group for single mothers where I met other women who had been through similar situations. It was a safe space where we could vent, share advice, and support each other. I realized I wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel ashamed of my situation. I was a survivor, and so was every woman in that group. As for Liam, I had no idea what he was doing. He still tried to contact me, but I had blocked him from everything. His social media posts were a mix of anger, denial, and desperation. It didn't matter anymore. His life wasn't my concern. My life, my daughter's life, was the only thing that mattered now. Lily turned 6 months old, and every milestone she hit felt like a personal victory. She was sitting up on her own, smiling at her reflection in the mirror, and giggling when I sang to her. She was perfect in every way, and I knew she would never know the kind of life I had endured with Liam. She would never feel like she had to shrink herself to make someone else comfortable. The other night, as I tucked her into bed, I whispered to her, "You're going to grow up in a world where you know you're worthy. You'll never let anyone treat you like I was treated." And for the first time in years, I felt at peace with myself. I had done what was best for both of us. I was done living in fear, done pretending. The old me had gone, but the new me was stronger than I ever thought possible. I was a mother, I was a survivor, and together, Lily and I were going to build the life we deserved.